Everybody, the next topic of our World War II unit is the Eastern Theater or the European Theater of War. By the end of this screencast, we'll be wrapping up just about the war in the European theater. So our learning outcomes, you should be able to describe the early turning point for the war in Europe. Secondly, understand the reasons behind invading North Africa before mainland Europe. There's a very distinct reason for this planned out. And lastly, explain why the successes of D-Day were surprising. So first things first, the Eastern Front. The Germans are moving east. This is after the Non-Aggression Pact has been violated by Hitler and the Nazis. They're closing in on Stalingrad. The one thing that really ends up turning the tides is winter. With the onset of winter, the Russians were allowed to, or were gaining the access to frozen areas where they were able to lay tracks to get supplies to themselves. And what ends up happening is the Russians are going to surround the Germans within the cities, cut the supply lines for the Germans. Not to mention these German troops were not really prepared for the Russian winter. It was one of the coldest winters in about 30 years for Russia. In January 1943, the German commander gives up. This is the first big turning point for the Allies in Europe. And really at this point, the only ally that's fighting in Europe is Stalin and the Russians. The British, ever since the bombing of Britain kind of stopped, Hitler's kind of turned his focus. So now it's going to allow the Soviets to move west, and ultimately is going to cost over 1 million Soviet lives in the process. And this is at a point where now Stalin is going to turn to the Allies and say, hey, look, we need to do something. You need to open up another front. I'm not going to take the brunt of all this for very much longer. So in North Africa, we have a couple big guns that are going to battle each other. You have Dwight D. Eisenhower on one side, and you have Erwin Desert Fox Rommel for the Nazis. Desert Fox is a highly decorated, one of the most decorated German soldiers from World War I. He is seen as a battlefield genius, especially there in the desert, hence his name. General Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to really make the name for himself here in North Africa. Ultimately, what's going to happen is the Allied troops are going to be deciding, Allied leaders rather, are going to decide where they're going to invade to help Stalin open up a second front. Is it going to be mainland Europe, being France? Is it going to be Italy, an attack from the south? Or is it going to be North Africa? The Allied leaders are going to settle on North Africa because they just don't think that these Allied troops are going to be ready yet for the bigger, more probably violent mainland invasions of Europe. So Eisenhower is going to end up pushing Desert Fox out of North Africa and his Africa Corps out of Africa. And at that point, Rommel is going to be reassigned to Normandy Beach, the beaches of Normandy in France. And he is the one that's going to be responsible for all those obstacles there. Desert Fox's demise is going to come when he gets kind of tied up with some of his buddies in a conspiracy to kill Hitler. The SS finds out. They give him basically two options: to be put on trial, which would be like a kangaroo court fixed trial, or to give him a cyanide pill and he would die with full military honors. And he picks a cyanide pill and ends up taking his own life that way. In Italy, after we have gone through North Africa, you can see it right down in this area right here with Algeria and Tunisia, we're going to go right across to this area right here, Sicily, take that first, and then go to the boot and up the boot of Italy there. Invading Italy was Churchill's idea. FDR wants to go to France next after North Africa. Churchill doesn't think it's a good idea. He doesn't believe that the troops are ready yet. So once we capture Sicily, we're going to force Mussolini to resign. The Italian people are happy. They think the war is over and they can finally get on with their lives. Now remember, not everybody is going to be for this war. Not even everybody in Germany is a Nazi or a Nazi supporter and in favor of the war and what they're doing. Okay? For the Italians, they think this is it. The war's over. They're going to be moving on with their lives. Unfortunately, Hitler is going to step in and take over command, and it's going to lead to 2 more years of fighting for the Italians, up until 1945, when basically Hitler and the Third Reich end up collapsing. Now, the Phantom Army, one of my favorite things to talk about with the war, something that doesn't get a whole lot of notoriety, but there is basically inflatables. There's a magician who has been kind of since discredited in the last 25, 30 years that came up with this idea, or he said he came up with this idea. He believed that you can fool the Germans. If he can fool people sitting in the same room with him, he can definitely fool the Germans who are running reconnaissance missions in the air. So they create all these inflatables to make the army look larger. And they're really nothing but a big kind of jumper almost. They also disguised their jeeps as tanks. You can see made out of plywood and canvas, and their tanks as jeeps. Because think about it, if you're going to bomb an airfield you're going to want to bomb the tanks first rather than the jeeps. Well, if you're going to disguise your jeeps as tanks, they're going to destroy the jeeps while you still have all of your tanks. Now, D-Day. This was scheduled for June 5th, 1944. It doesn't happen June 5th. It happens a day later. It gets called off on June 5th because of the very, very poor conditions. There's supposed to be airstrikes. They're supposed to have 13,000 bombs. There's supposed to be support by amphibious Sherman tanks, which we'll see a picture of in just a second. And all in all, over 3 million troops are going to be involved in this invasion. Now, these guys are given a kind of hero send-off. They're having a huge breakfast, pancakes, bacon, anything you name it, anything breakfast, okay? Coffee, chocolates, all sorts of stuff. The problem is they are given this in England, and then they're shipped across the channel in very rocky conditions, and a lot of them are going to get seasick. The code name for this entire operation, the mainland invasion, is Operation Overlord. The D-Day amphibious invasion is called Operation Neptune. Not that you really need to know those two things, but it's just good to know. This is what an amphibious Sherman tank looks like. This area right in here, this is all, and you can kind of see it's been side cut here, but this is all made out of canvas, waterproof canvas, and they test really well in very calm conditions. However, that morning, the English Channel is not calm, and most of these tanks end up sinking. So the actual D-Day invasion itself, June 6, 1944, Operation Neptune, like I said a second ago. This is Omaha Beach and 4 other beaches there in Normandy. The Germans have 30 anti-tank guns and mortars waiting for the Allies. A lot of the German command at this point did not think there was even going to be an invasion because of the poor conditions. So a lot of them are even out on leave, including Rommel at this point. The Allies held the beaches for 7 days, surprisingly. If you look at Saving Private Ryan, the first 20 minutes of that film, the brutality of what's happening with the invasion is incredible. August 25th, after we've held the beachheads, we have a firm control of that area. We start to advance. From June to August 25th, Patton and the U.S. troops are going to move into Paris and liberate France as a whole. So now we are starting to kind of squeeze the Germans on both sides. So you have the Russians from the east and now the rest of the Allies from the west. All in all, we have about a little under 9,000 total deaths. It doesn't seem like a lot out of 3 million people, but most of these people died in the first hour, 2 hours of the actual invasion. You can see in this picture right here, you have Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword Beach. We had that Phantom Army set up to make it look like we're going to cross right at the Strait of Dover, which is the closest distance between France and England. But in actuality, we crossed over here. You can see here, thanks to Rommel, all of these obstacles that are going to get put in. He saw how easily that the Allies invaded Italy and how easily we took the beachheads there. So he saw this Normandy area very similar. So rather than allowing the Allies to take the beachhead so easily here, you have all of these obstacles and you have the landmines. Here's a very famous picture you can see looking from the ships onward. The Nazis had all of their machine gunnery up in this area right here on the ridge. Here's another picture. These guys were told not to go over the sides. You're supposed to go directly out the front. But again, if you've seen Saving Private Ryan, you saw how easily they were picked off right in the front. The only thing that saved a lot of these guys was doing exactly what they were told not to and going over the side. Here's another picture, guys, on the beaches being dragged off and out of the water. So you see these Semetics here working on these guys. Now the Battle of the Bulge. For the most part, this is the desperate last offensive by the Germans. They are running out of supplies. The idea is to break through the Allied forces and circle around and encompass us and make us surrender. It doesn't work. We allow them to go 60 miles into our territory, but we don't break. We bend, but we don't break. It lasts for about a month. Once the Germans run out of supplies, the Third Reich is basically over at this point. After the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler basically knows that the war is going to be over. You can see here in this area, the Germans advance all the way through here, but we don't let them get behind us. So, our recap, you should be able to describe the early turning point in the war for Europe. That is absolutely Stalingrad and the winter that hits there, the worst in 30 years. Secondly, understand the reasons behind invading North Africa before mainland Europe. You can almost maybe consider North Africa and Italy the minor leagues compared to mainland Europe, which I would consider France, that Operation Neptune, the D-Day invasion. That's the big league. And then lastly, explain why the successes of D-Day were surprising. We had air support, but it was foggy, and none of the air support really helped. The Sherman amphibious tanks didn't help because most of them sank. And the Germans had the high ground, and high ground is always an advantage in war. And it's really surprising that we were able to advance and end up taking those beachheads even after a week. So if you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. I'm out.